Welcome to Stories from the Teacher's Desk. This is where educators connect, share, and grow.
In each episode, we share inspiring stories, practical strategies, and innovative solutions to empower teachers and transform classrooms around the world. Ever feel like you could level up your understanding of a complex topic in the time it takes for your coffee to brew? That's pretty much our mission here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today, we're zeroing in on a fascinating piece of educational research from Malaysia. It looks at something we all do, whether we're in a classroom or, a boardroom, working together.
Exactly. We're going to unpack a study conducted at Tenby International School, and it dives deep into how a group of teachers helped their Year 10 English literature students become, better collaborators.
Our main goal today is really to make the aims, the methods, and the findings of this study crystal clear so you can see why looking at collaboration in a school setting can have such, widespread relevance.
So let's paint the picture a bit. This research took place in a Year 10 English literature class. These were high-achieving students in Malaysia. But it wasn't just about analyzing poems.
Okay.
The teachers were specifically focused on developing the students' collaboration skills within this academic context.
Got it. So English Lit was kind of the tool, but collaboration was the skill they were really trying to build. What were they hoping to achieve by doing this?
Well, the main aims were to really nurture those teamwork abilities, but in a structured learning environment. Beyond that, they wanted to weave essential life competencies, things like communication and shared problem solving directly into what the students were learning. They chose poetry analysis as a specific area to try and boost both their literary understanding and their capacity to collaborate effectively.
That makes sense. Poetry often has layers of meaning, right? So tackling it together seems like a smart way to see different perspectives in action. What actually sparked this research? What were the teachers hoping to see happen in their classroom?
Well, there were several driving forces, really. They hypothesized that by actively focusing on collaboration, students would develop stronger general interpersonal skills.
Okay.
They hoped this would manifest as students, taking on different roles within group tasks, participating more actively, contributing more evenly, stuff like that.
Right.
Their other key hope was that by collaborating on interpreting literature, the students would gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of the texts through those shared insights. Ultimately, they were aiming to make learning more dynamic and engaging, hoping to see students become more invested and involved in their own education.
So it's about sharpening both their academic skills and their ability to work well with others. That's a pretty significant goal. What was the central question they were trying to answer with this study?
The core research question was, and I'm quoting here, how can we help students in this RLS class or setting to develop interpersonal skills, specifically that of collaboration, in the context of understanding the context of literary texts to explore meaning?
Okay, that's a bit academic.
Yeah, it is. In simpler terms, they were trying to figure out the most effective ways to integrate collaboration into the study of literature, particularly to see if it could enhance how deeply students understand and interpret texts.
Okay, they had their question. How did they actually go about finding the answer? What was their research design like?
They designed a sequence of 3 research lessons, RL1, RL2, and RL3. Each one built slightly on the last in terms of how much autonomy the students had in their collaborative work.
Autonomy. Okay.
Yeah, the idea was to gradually reduce the amount of direct support, or what educators often call scaffolding, to observe how it impacted the students' ability to collaborate successfully.
You mentioned scaffolding. For those of us less familiar with that term in education, what does that actually look like in practice in this context?
That's a great question. In this study, scaffolding initially meant providing a very structured planning document, almost like a detailed checklist, really,
Oh, okay.
to guide the students in their group work and help them think about their roles and contributions.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's dive into these research lessons. What did they do in the first one, RL1?
In RL1, the collaboration was quite structured, as we just mentioned. The students were tasked with planning a multimedia presentation focusing on the characters in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Right, classic book.
Exactly. And to provide that scaffolding, they used this planning document, a checklist, essentially, that prompted them to define roles within the group, consider each member's strengths and weaknesses in relation to the task, that sort of thing.
So a very guided approach to teamwork right out of the gate. What happened in the second lesson, RL2? Did they keep the checklist?
No, in RL2, they deliberately removed that structured support. The aim here was to foster greater student initiative and independence in their collaboration.
Okay, take the training wheels off.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
The focus of this lesson was on analyzing poetry, specifically looking at poetic techniques using the acronym SMILE. Yep, it stands for Structure, Meaning, Imagery, Literary Devices, and Effect. The students were expected to collaborate on this analysis without that explicit checklist to guide them.
Interesting. So a shift from a very hands-on approach to a more hands-off one. What about the third lesson, RL3? How did that differ?
For RL3, they took a different approach to the group dynamics altogether. They actually regrouped the students based on their perceived academic ability levels.
Oh, okay. Why did they do that?
Well, the thinking behind this was to see how students would engage in collaborative work when they were primarily working with peers of similar academic standing, emphasizing a more independent form of collaboration. And across all three lessons, it's important to remember that the teachers were actively observing the students and gathering their feedback, to inform and refine the subsequent lessons. It was a very iterative process.
So a cycle of teach, observe, adjust. Got it. They also mentioned looking closely at a few specific students A, B, and C. Who were they and why the focus on them?
Yeah, these three students were chosen as representative case studies. They sort of illustrated different learning styles and common approaches to group work.
Okay.
Student A was described as someone who typically works well in groups, is approachable, tends to take the lead. The teachers predicted she would thrive in collaborative tasks.
The natural collaborator type.
Pretty much. Then student B was seen as bright and studious, but someone who generally prefers to work independently. The expectation was that he might initially struggle with the point of collaborating, but would likely adapt.
Right. The lone wolf, maybe.
Kind of. And student C was portrayed as more reserved, less academically focused, and someone who seemed to rely on group work mainly to support his learning with minimal personal input. The prediction there was that he would likely view the checklist in RL1 as just a set of tasks to tick off.
Okay, so these three students were like a lens, helping them see how the different approaches were impacting various learners. What did the teachers actually observe in RL1? Did things play out as they expected?
Well, for student A, the observations largely confirmed the prediction she worked well within her team. However, they did note she tended to treat the scaffold somewhat like a to-do list and primarily collaborated closely with just one partner, not always involving all group members in decision-making.
Interesting nuance there. What about student B, the one who preferred working alone?
Student B actually presented a bit of a surprise. He focused intently on the task, engaged effectively with the provided structure, and demonstrated clear collaborative learning with his peers. So the structure actually seemed to help him engage.
Wow, okay. And student C, the one they thought would just tick boxes.
For student C, their prediction was quite accurate, unfortunately. He concentrated on just getting the task done, using the checklist with minimal genuine interaction, often working silently alongside others unless specifically prompted by the teacher.
It's really interesting how student B's experience challenged their initial assumptions. What did the students overall have to say after RL1? What was their feedback on that first structured lesson?
Generally, the students reported that they enjoyed the group discussions and found the checklist to be a useful tool in guiding their collaboration. They also liked the multimedia presentation task.
Sounds positive overall.
Mostly, yeah. However, some students felt that the project could have been designed to necessitate more genuine interdependence. They observed instances where some group members weren't fully contributing,
The free rider problem.
Exactly. A key suggestion that emerged was to design future tasks in a way that truly required everyone's input for the group to succeed.
So while the structure was helpful, it didn't magically guarantee everyone was equally involved. That's a really valuable insight. What happened after RO1? How did the teachers use this feedback to shape their next step?
Well, based on both their own observations and that student feedback, the teachers had a discussion and made the decision to remove the explicit scaffolding for RL2.
Right, you mentioned that.
Yeah, their reasoning was that perhaps by taking away the direct guidance on collaboration, they might encourage students to take more ownership and develop those skills more independently. A bit of a gamble, maybe.
And how did that gamble pay off in RL2 when the checklist was gone? What did they see with their case study students then?
Well, for student A, the good collaborator, they noticed she seemed to have internalized the strategies from RL1. She even independently referred back to the principles of the collaboration scaffold to support her group's work. So she continued to be effective.
Oh, it worked for her.
It seemed to, yes. However, student B, the one who surprisingly benefited from the structure, he seemed to struggle more without it. While there was still some collaboration and learning happening, it wasn't as focused or productive as it had been in the first lesson.
Okay, so taking away the structure wasn't great for him.
Apparently not. And for student C, well, without the prompts and the framework of the checklist, he required even more direct teacher intervention just to engage meaningfully with the lesson.
So removing the scaffolding had a pretty mixed bag of results, it sounds like. Definitely not a universal improvement.
Yeah.
What did the students themselves report about RL2?
They mentioned that they enjoyed the process of brainstorming ideas about the poem and working together as a team to analyze it. They felt they learned a lot about different poetic techniques.
Okay.
Interestingly, though, they highlighted that direct teacher prompting during the lesson was a particularly effective teaching strategy in this more open environment. So they still needed guidance, just maybe in a different form.
Right, not a checklist, but the teacher stepping in. And what were the teachers' reflections after RL2? Did they decide to stick with this more hands-off approach, or?
Their reflection was quite insightful, actually. They came to realize that the students, really across different ability levels, had actually benefited significantly from the structured support provided in RL1. It appeared that they were able to model their collaborative behaviors based on that initial framework, even student A, who seems fine without it. So, as a result, they decided that for RL3, they needed to find a balance, something that would still support the development of collaboration skills, but also encourage more meaningful and personalized engagement with those skills.
A middle ground.
Exactly. Their plan was to begin RL3 with an explicit discussion about what collaboration actually means and why it's important, before they even introduce the task itself, sort of front-loading the concept.
That sounds like a really thoughtful adjustment. And in RL3, they also changed up the groups, right? Based on ability.
Right.
How did their case study students fare in these new groupings?
Right. Well, for student A, being grouped with peers of similar academic standing seemed to have a positive effect. She collaborated effectively and contributed well.
Good for her.
Yeah. For student B, though, while he did still participate, he was observed to be less effective than usual. He didn't provide as much support to his peers' learning as he typically did in his regular mixed ability group.
Oh, interesting. So the ability grouping didn't necessarily help him collaborate better.
It seems not. And student C, unfortunately, became even more withdrawn in the new group, despite the teacher's efforts to place him with students he felt comfortable with. His active participation and learning just weren't very evident. The teachers noted that while grouping students by ability showed some potential, maybe it needed to be implemented earlier in the process, or perhaps more consistently, to really benefit all learners. It wasn't a simple fix.
So after these three quite distinct research lessons and the detailed observations of the case study students, what were the overarching key findings of the study? What did they really learn about how to foster collaboration in the classroom?
Yeah, there were some big takeaways. One of the most significant findings was that simply telling students to work together is just not a recipe for effective collaboration. It doesn't really work.
Right, seems obvious when you say it, but
But it's often what happens. They discovered that when there was an explicit focus on the principles of collaboration or cooperation, often accompanied by a clear framework or set of guidelines, students were much more successful in working as a cohesive team.
so intentionality matters.
Hugely. When left to figure it out on their own, some students tended to either disengage, like student C, or not truly collaborate in a meaningful way, maybe just dividing tasks instead of actually working together. They also recognized that the understanding of what constitutes essential life competencies, like collaboration, can vary considerably from one student to another. It's not a one-size-fits-all concept.
Okay.
Ultimately, the central learning was that students require explicit guidance, not only in understanding the academic curriculum, but also in developing these crucial collaborative competencies, and that providing structured support, that scaffolding, can be a really valuable strategy to assist all learners, regardless of their starting point.
That's a really powerful takeaway, that collaboration is a skill that genuinely needs to be taught and supported, not just assumed or expected. So, what are the practical implications of these findings for teachers in the classroom? What can they learn from this study to apply in their own teaching?
Well, the study strongly suggests that teachers should actively consider incorporating frameworks and models for collaboration directly into their lesson plans. Don't just hope it happens.
Make it explicit.
Exactly. This provides a clear structure that can help students with diverse abilities navigate the complexities of group work more effectively. The researchers also suggest that consistently using these kinds of frameworks could, over time, help students to internalize these strategies and develop more independent collaboration skills. It's not a one-off thing.
Right, building habits. And it wasn't just about individual teachers trying new things, was it? The school administration itself seemed to have some reflections and was considering making changes based on this research.
Yes, absolutely. The school leadership recognized the importance of more explicitly integrating these competencies into their overall educational planning. They were exploring the possibility of creating teacher focus groups to further develop their understanding of the most effective ways to teach these essential skills.
So, systemic change, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. They also observed a positive link between explicitly discussing collaboration and students' awareness of the school's own values system. They called them Tenby Citizen Points or Tenby Citizen Values. So, highlighting how this kind of focus can reinforce the broader culture of the school community.
That's interesting. It sounds like it sparked some really valuable self-reflection among the educators involved. What about the researchers themselves? What were their key takeaways from the experience of conducting this study?
They emphasized the critical importance of investing sufficient time in the initial planning stages of any research project. Don't rush the setup. And also the value of involving students in the process right from the beginning.
Getting student buy-in.
Definitely. They also reflected on the inherent challenges of doing research within the constraints of a busy school schedule that's always tough, and the significant benefits of being transparent with students about the goals and purpose of the study.
Makes sense.
Their advice for other teachers who might be interested in doing similar research was basically be patient and persistent, leverage the expertise of colleagues and external specialists if you can, and invite other educators to observe your lessons to get fresh and diverse perspectives. Don't do it in isolation.
Good advice. This study seems to connect to a broader educational philosophy, doesn't it? You mentioned the International School Partnership's Life Competencies framework earlier. How does this research really align with that larger framework?
Absolutely. It aligns very closely. This research directly addresses several key competencies outlined in that framework. Most obviously, collaboration itself, that's the main focus. But also essential skills like communication, which is fundamental to effective teamwork. Critical thinking, which is crucial for analyzing literature together. Learning how to learn, as students reflect on their collaborative processes and what worked or didn't. And even digital literacy through that multimedia presentation element they did in RO1.
So it hit quite a few points.
Yeah, so this wasn't just an isolated experiment. It was clearly part of a larger school-wide commitment to developing these vital life skills in their students.
And it sounds like this research isn't over. The report mentions some planned next steps. What are they hoping to explore in the future?
Yeah, they're planning to extend this line of inquiry to younger students, specifically in primary key stage 2, so maybe ages 7 to 11 or so.
Oh, interesting. Down the age range.
Exactly. Their aim is to explore how to effectively implement a similar focus on these essential competencies across all stages of learning within the school. The ultimate goal is to develop clear, practical frameworks that all teachers can utilize, whether through their own classroom-based research or just by integrating these competencies into their everyday teaching practices.
So making it standard practice.
That seems to be the goal. They also plan to collaborate closely with primary school teachers to gain their insights and involve them directly in their ongoing research collaboration group.
So they're taking the valuable lessons learned in this Year 10 classroom and really looking at how to apply them more broadly across different age groups within the school. That's a great example of building on initial findings.
Exactly. It demonstrates a real commitment to continuous improvement and a desire to understand the most effective ways to equip students with these crucial collaboration skills throughout their entire educational journey.
Okay, so if you, our listener, want a quick summary of what we've explored today, what's the absolute core message of this research?
I think the central message is this: explicitly teaching and providing structured support for collaboration skills within academic tasks yields significantly better results than simply expecting students to naturally collaborate effectively. It just doesn't happen automatically for everyone.
Right.
This research provides really valuable insights into how using frameworks like those planning documents, and engaging in explicit discussions about teamwork can foster more productive collaboration and ultimately lead to deeper and more meaningful learning for the students.
Precisely. Hopefully, this deep dive has given you a clear and concise understanding of this fascinating research study and its key findings without you needing to wade through the full academic report yourself.
And it prompts an interesting question maybe for you to consider.
Yeah.
How might the principles of explicitly teaching and scaffolding collaboration apply in your own professional or personal life when you're working in teams? What kinds of frameworks or guidelines could you use or maybe develop to foster more effective and meaningful collaboration in the contexts you operate in?
Definitely some food for thought there. If you are keen to explore the work of Camtree further, or maybe access the full research report we've discussed today, you can find more information on their website at www.camtree.org. It seems like a fantastic resource for educators and really anyone interested in the practicalities of educational research.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and stay tuned for the next one.